You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some breaking news here where Donald Trump is trying to avoid having to pay a massive $5 million settlement in a civil suit against him. Can you explain what just happened in court?
Yeah, so people will remember that E. Jean Carroll sued Donald Trump not just once, but twice, and she won in both lawsuits that she brought against him for assault and defamation. He appealed the first judgment. That was the $5 million judgment. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his appeal. They affirmed the jury's finding in favor of E. Jean Carroll. So what did Donald Trump do? Well, he asked the entire Second Circuit Federal Court of Appeals to rehear the case, to sit what we call en banc, full court. That takes a vote of a majority of all appellate court judges in that particular jurisdiction, and they just voted him down. So now, E. Jean Carroll is about as close as she can get in this case to collecting on that $5 million judgment. We're going to talk about the second judgment in a minute. So the only thing left for Donald Trump to do, and this is a real Hail Mary, is try to convince the Supreme Court to take up, what is a relatively run-of-the-mill civil case where a private party sued another private party for assault and defamation and won a $5 million judgment. Judge Kaplan is the federal court judge who presided over not just one, but both of these civil lawsuits brought by E. Jean Carroll. That will become an important factor in how the appeals court is likely to resolve the next case. That's the $83 million judgment in the second civil suit that E. Jean Carroll won against Donald Trump. So it looks like, Donald Trump is kind of at the end of his rope and maybe just kind of hanging on with one hand, but he's about to let go, and he is about to have to pay out E. Jean Carroll a whole bunch of money for what a jury found he did.
I want to talk about the $83 million judgment in just a moment, but first, on the prospect of the Supreme Court hearing this case, what would you put your money on in terms of the highest court in the land that has thousands of requests in terms of the cases that they hear, that they're going to take some $5 million defamation case between two private parties in a civil matter?
Brian, you already know I'm not a high roller. I'm not a gambling man. $1 is my betting limit. I am willing to put about 90 cents of my maximum $1 bet on the Supreme Court summarily turning away Donald Trump's efforts to try to bubble this thing up to the Supreme Court. There just are no appreciable legal issues, certainly no constitutional issues, for the Supreme Court to weigh into what, as I say, is a pretty routine, run-of-the-mill, everyday civil case that was decided by a jury between two civil litigants. So I don't think the Supreme Court, now, it's a fool's errand to ever predict what this Supreme Court will do, given that we have a couple of folks up there, at least a couple of folks like Thomas and Alito, who are no longer honest brokers of the facts, the law, or the Constitution. But I don't think they're going to be able to muster the votes to bubble this case up to the Supreme Court.
Okay, so let's talk about the $83.3, I believe it was, million judgment that was levied after this first one, after this $5 million case. This obviously is going to follow the same trajectory as the $5 million case, and so what can we expect to happen next on that front?
Yeah, this is unusual. You don't often get two cases where the parties are the same, the plaintiff and the defendant, where the judge is the same, the jurisdiction, the forum is the same. The only thing that's different is the members of the community who were called to jury service and who were selected to serve on the jury. But the thing is, Brian, the legal issues are the same. The blueprint, that is how the judge handled issues, objections, evidentiary decisions he had to make, jury instructions to be given to the jury so they would understand how to view the evidence and, what they needed to find in order to hold Donald Trump liable for what he did. All of the issues are virtually the same, if not identical, in the second appeal, in the $83 million case, as they were in the first appeal, the $5 million case. So I think this is going to be a pretty easy lift for the Court of Appeals, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, to say, you know what, been there, done that, seen this movie before, ruled previously that Donald Trump loses and E. Jean Carroll wins. So I have a feeling you're going to see the same thing go on in the $83 million case that we just experienced in the $5 million case. That is, Donald Trump loses before the 3-judge panel. Donald Trump then asks the whole Second Circuit Court of Appeals again to hear the case en banc. They reject it, and then Donald Trump's last gasp is the Supreme Court. So, I think because everybody has seen this movie before, Donald Trump is likely to lose the $83 million case on appeal as well.
By the way, it's worth mentioning when you bring up the fact that we so rarely see two cases with the same litigants, the same jurisdiction, the same underlying violation, and that's because usually a $5 million judgment would be enough of a deterrent to stop the defendant from committing the same violation again. And yet Donald Trump has no self-control, no discipline, and wanted to use this as an opportunity to defame her again. And so here we are. But to your exact point, we don't often see this, but we also don't often see defendants who have so little self-control and discipline as Donald Trump has.
Brian, let me just say, no one can ever accuse Donald Trump of learning from his mistakes. He makes the same mistakes over and over again. Sometimes it feels like the only time he opens his mouth is to change feet.
Right. With that said, this is all going to cost E. Jean Carroll money. I mean, this whole appeals process is lengthy. I don't know that attorneys are generally in the business of working for free. Generally, these billable hours rack up, and it costs quite a bit of money. And so in this appeals process, is E. Jean Carroll going to be entitled, if she wins, to even more court fees on top of that, even more attorney's fees on top of that, so that she can be made whole?
Yeah, Brian, it's a great point, and it's a question that we can't fully answer because we are not privy to the financial arrangement between lawyer and client. Yeah. Rarely do we know anything about, retainer fees, billable hours, or if legal teams take the case pro bono because they believe there are really important principles at stake that need to be vindicated, not just for E. Jean Carroll, but beyond. So I don't know if the lawyers took this case pro bono. What it feels like is most likely is that they may have taken it on a contingency basis, so they would take a percentage of whatever the ultimate recovery is by E. Jean Carroll. But you're right. I mean, this continues to put E. Jean Carroll kind of through the ringer, although I tell you, she has been tough as nails since day one. She has never flinched. Donald Trump is the one who flinches over and over again. So, I don't think we should mourn that E. Jean Carroll may actually not get as much of a recovery in the $5 million case and ultimately in the $83 million case. Some of the money may be going to her legal team, but you know what? I think the legal team did one heck of a job, and I can't speak for E. Jean Carroll, but I'll bet she is happy to give them whatever percentage has been agreed upon in their, sort of legal arrangement.
Yeah. As Donald Trump continues to put E. Jean Carroll through the ringer now, it's worth noting that there were other instances where he opted to use the same language that he ended up having to pay out $5 million and $83 million on, and she opted not to, bring him to court for a third time or a fourth time or a fifth time. Do you think the fact that he is putting her through the ringer now by virtue of all of this lengthy appeals process, that maybe he's squandering whatever goodwill prevented E. Jean Carroll from suing him a third time? And also, by the way, we know that when somebody says something about him losing this case or losing this eventual appeal or the Supreme Court eventually not opting to hear it, that he's going to say something, and he'll probably say, I don't even know who she was. He'll use the same verbiage that he did that landed him in this mess. And should E. Jean Carroll take that into account when she determines whether or not she's going to go for victory number 3?
Yeah, all good questions that only E. Jean Carroll and her legal team can answer. But let me take a crack at it from my perspective. It is every defendant or respondent's right to appeal an adverse verdict. And Donald Trump has done that. It is every defendant's right to then ask the appeals court for en banc full court review. And Donald Trump has done that. And it is every defendant's right to petition the Supreme Court to accept the case for review. And I'm sure Donald Trump will be doing that as well. So that leads me to conclude I don't believe E. Jean Carroll and her legal team are going to be unduly upset or aggravated by the fact that Donald Trump is using the avenues that the legal system provides to him to contest this in every way the law allows. But I agree with you that we all remember the reporting how even after he lost 2 civil judgments, massive civil judgments, he kept running his mouth saying the same stuff that could lead to a 3rd defamation suit being brought. But E. Jean Carroll probably said, you know what? I whooped Donald Trump in court, but good twice. I think I've proved the point, and I'm not going to live the rest of my life litigating cases against the likes of Donald Trump.
Well, in terms of whether E. Jean Carroll ultimately does opt to pursue further litigation, that might depend a little bit on Donald Trump's willingness to actually comply with these court orders if and when the final ruling is handed down and he has no more avenues for appeal, whether he actually goes ahead and gives her the money that she's owed. And so I presume that if he makes it even more difficult to actually procure the money that that he has to pay out, that $5 million and eventually the $83 million, that might offer some insight into whether or not E. Jean Carroll wants to pursue further litigation.
Yeah, it's a good point, because if you recall the sort of similar circumstance of Rudy Giuliani, who continued to defame the Georgia state election workers, Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman, even after he lost the defamation case against them, that created real problems for Rudy. And they have been forever trying to satisfy the judgment by going after Rudy's assets. But here's the thing. I believe in both of the civil cases that E. Jean Carroll won against Donald Trump. Trump was made to deposit with the court certain amounts so that there would be money to pay out the judgment at the end of the day. At this moment, Brian, I don't remember the precise amounts, but I think E. Jean Carroll will probably have an easier time collecting on these judgments than Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman had collecting on the judgment that they won against Rudy Giuliani.
Okay, and finally, last question here on this topic. When can we expect this to be fully resolved? Like, what are next steps here as we await, an eventual appeal with the Supreme Court? How long is it going to take for the Supreme Court to actually respond? And when can we have this thing finally in the books?
Yeah, I think the deadline is pretty short-fused. I don't know the precise number of days, but pretty short-fused for Donald Trump to file his petition seeking to have the Supreme Court accept the case for review. Now, the Supreme Court, of course, operates under very few rules, no enforceable rules of ethics, in fact. Maybe that will change someday. But, very few rules with respect to how quickly it has to decide whether it wants to accept the case for review or not. I have a feeling they're, again, a fool's errand, but let me be foolish for a minute. I have a feeling they will probably summarily reject Donald Trump's petition for review without comment. Of course, you may see a dissent from the likes of a Thomas or Alito, but I think in the coming weeks, we're going to have some definitive closure to the $5 million case.
All right. Well, we will, of course, stay on top of that issue as soon as we have that final resolution here. So for those who are watching, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. It's the best way to support our work and the best way to support independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.